Spring is coming up quick, and if you're like me, you're ready to get out on the water. But what baits or tactics do we need this spring to catch bigger bass? Well, stick around with me for this video and we'll figure it out. So before we start talking about rod and reel combination, bait selection, color selection, there's a few things that we need to know about the bass before we can plan on hooking into any big ones this spring. The first thing that we need to know is, where have the bass been? Where have the bass been all winter? Where have they been in the past month? And the second thing we need to know is, where are the bass going, right? This is a transitional time of year. It's spring, the water temperature warming up. The bass are obviously moving, but where are they moving to? And the third thing we need to figure out is, what pit stop those fellas plan on taking in between? Well, to answer the first question, the bass have been deep, and that is absolutely relative to wherever you live or whatever the body of water is you're fishing. But wherever the deeper pockets of that body of water are, is where the bass have been. It's a survival instinct, right? There's obviously ice on top of the water in a lot of parts of the country. I think just about everywhere this year has dealt with snow. So obviously the surface temperature of the water is a lot colder than in deeper areas. So for survival, the bass move to deeper parts of the lake. Now, whenever we start to talk about spring and water temps moving up, the bass are going to move up shallow. Where are they going to move to up shallow? Well, for a couple of different reasons. They're going to move to a couple of different spots. The first and most important thing is, this time of year, the bass, again, are thinking about survival and instinct. So they're thinking about the spawn. That's a really important movement for the bass every year. So they're going to move into spawning flats in the back of pockets and places like that. And in between, they're going to load up on like primary and secondary points. Now, how do we figure out which spots the bass have been in? Because there's probably a lot of deep water on your lake. And where the bass are going, because there's a lot of shallow pockets and places that fish can hide or where you think they might spawn. And to answer that question without going into a whole lot of detail just yet, I will go more into detail here in a second and show you guys a map. But you just have to look at what the highway system is inside of your lake. And when I say highway system, creek channels, river channels, stuff like that, places that you see current and easy access for fish to move from deep water to shallow water. So you want to look for areas where you have deeper pockets that are really close to primary lake points, secondary lake points, that give them quick access into shallow flats where they can spawn safely and then move back out into the lake later in the year just as easy. Third thing we need to figure out is the pit stops in between. I've already briefly covered on that, but the fish are going to stop on mostly primary and secondary points right off of the main lake. Whenever they're getting ready for the spawn, they're obviously making a big voyage and they're going to be feeding up and they're going to be bulking up. They're going to be feeding pretty heavy. So the first place you want to go, the first place you want to try when you think the fish are starting to move up out of the deep, is primary points. Especially like in a lot of the southern states right now, outside of Florida where a lot of the fish are already spawning, you get into a lot of the southern states right now, a lot of those fish are going to be on the primary and even secondary points this time of year, heading from the deeper waters into their spawning flats. Whenever you're looking at your topo map, the best way to figure out these points, and this is something I'm going to show you on a topo map here in a second, you have to find points that are easily accessible to the main lake and to deeper water quickly. But what do they look like? How can you find them on your lake? What are you looking for? Well, let me show you.
So we'll start off with talking about the highway system inside of your body of water. And for an example here, I'm using the Ohio River where I fish at. So right here is your deeper body of water and your main river channel. Now, in the springtime, whenever the fish go up to spawn, they're going to move into areas like this one here where you see French Creek or Dana. And don't worry, these are no big secrets where we're at. Everybody pretty well knows about them, and if you haven't, this video is a good place to learn. So here's your main river channel, and you can't really see it on here. Maybe some lakes on the topo map you'll be able to see it, but there's a creek channel that goes back in here to French Creek, and there's also a creek channel that goes back in here to Dana. Now, these fish will use this creek channel as part of their highway system. So when I was talking about primary and secondary points earlier, when these fish are moving up from the water when it's starting to warm up, this would be a good example of a primary point right here, right off the main body of water. And then like this would be an example of maybe a small secondary point. Right here's a secondary point, or even right here could be considered a secondary point off the main body of water. But what you're looking for is where like a place where you can find a spawning flat like this, shallower water that's calm out of the current. And then you can find a moving creek channel that gives them access to the deeper water, and then a primary or secondary point in the area. That's where you're going to find your fish this time of year. So The fish, obviously, they're going to move up from out of the deeper water, and they're early in the spring, they're going to stay right on the primary points mostly. As the spring moves forward and the water temps get warmer, they're going to move on to the secondary points, and then they're going to move back to their spawning flats. In the meantime, there's going to be several waves of fish doing this back and forth, so you're going to have one group of fish that might be on the primary point pattern, and another group of fish that's already back here spawning. Vice versa. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, let's say you pull up today and you find some fish on a primary point in this area, and you go back tomorrow expecting to find the same thing, but you don't. Go hit up those secondary points, because especially early in this process, those fish will bounce back and forth between the primary and secondary points. Now, before I wrap this section of the video up, I just want to let everybody know, if you're not real familiar with how to read a topo map, like these lines you see here in depth, let me know in the comments below if you want. I'll make a video that goes more into depth about a topo map.
So now that we've figured out where the bass have been, where the bass are going, and where you can find them at in between, it's time to start talking about the baits and the rod and reel setups, color selection, line selection, all the stuff that really makes it happen. And when it comes to my bait selection this time of year, and when I say this time of year, I'm talking about pre-spawn. The fish are moving up from the deeper water to the shallower water, and they're posting up on those primary and secondary points that we just talked about. When it comes to that time of year, the type of baits that I like to use are larger, fast-moving baits that I can cover a lot of water with, right? Really aggressive baits, because the fish are aggressive this time of year. They're feeding up for the spawn. They're trying to get as much food in them as they can. They're being really aggressive. So this is a good time of year for you to take advantage of a really fun bite, one of the most fun times of the year to fish if you're a bass fisherman. Whenever it comes to those baits, I have 5 of them sit out here in front of me. We'll just go over what my 5 personal favorite are this time of year, the 5 that you're going to find on the deck of my boat, absolutely every time I'm out on the water, especially if it's a new body of water. I want to talk about this time of year, and probably one of my favorites is a spinnerbait. Now, I know a spinnerbait's kind of old school, but they're still really effective this time of year, especially these Blue Rock spinnerbaits with a double Colorado blade. They work amazing this time of year. When it comes to the color selection I like, white or red is really the 2 basic colors I like this time of year. If I'm trying to mimic crawfish, or if I think they're a little closer to the bottom, relating more to the bottom, I'll throw a red spinnerbait with like a creature bait as the trailer on it. If I think they're chasing shad more and then they're higher up in the water column, I might throw a white spinnerbait with like a Kitech as the trailer. Whenever it comes to my blade selection, this time of year, I really like a double Colorado leaf blade. And the reason I like a double Colorado blade is because it makes a lot of noise, it's more aggressive, and this time of year, the water is typically stained. So if the water's more stained, a double Colorado gives you more of a thumping action and a sound that really helps pick up those aggressive reaction bites that you need to get some of the bigger bass in your boat. When it comes to the line I like to use, 16 to 20 pound test, preferably a higher pound test, because you really have a good chance this time of year catching one of your bigger fish, and you don't want to lose it because you had too light a line on. Honestly, stick to 18 to 20 pound test, fluorocarbon preferably, a slower speed reel. Don't go into the 7s or anything like that. Try to stay in the 6s or even the high 5s. But stick to a slower speed reel. For me personally, I like a 7-foot to a 7'2" medium heavy rod with a moderate action tip. The second bait, and with a lot of similarities, is a chatterbait or a bladed jig. With this, I stick more this time of year to just a crawfish presentation with like a black and blue, some kind of black creature bait, or I'll even go into the reds with this. I like to stay with, I didn't mention this with the spinner baits, but the same weights go for both of these for me this time of year. I really like a 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce weight. I stick with the same line, really the same rod and reel setup. There's not a whole lot that changes from a spinner bait to a chatterbait with me, but there is a few differences of when I'll use them, and I'll go into that here in just a second. The third bait I really like to use this time of year is a buzz bait. Now, this one's more for as we get further along in this transitional period, a little bit closer to the spawn, and even a little bit into the spawn, whenever you have fish that are up on spawning points and fish that are starting to move out and they're kind of crossing each other. Whenever the fish get to that point and the water temps have warmed up, let's say 55 degrees or higher, a buzz bait is a good fun bait to pull out to catch a lot of aggressive fish. It's a great way to cover water. It's a great way to move around and try to figure out where these fish are at, and it's ultimately just a really fun bite. When it comes to my setup, I like a 7'4" to a 7'6" heavy rod with a moderate to a fast action tip. I exclusively throw monofilament with these because it floats better. And again, I stick with a heavier pound test. I really like a a 16 or an 18-pound test with this, or even a 20-pound test. Whenever it comes to trailers and stuff like that, I always throw a trailer with this. This time of year, typically, instead of doing like buzz toads or something like that, I really like to take those Rage grubs and put on the back of this. They work amazing. They have a nice little kicking action that to me looks like shad fluttering at the top of the water. It's a great way to start getting hookups and get big bites this time of year. Fourth bait I want to go over with you, and probably one of the most universally well-known baits for this time of year, is a jerkbait. Now, the reason a jerkbait works well earlier in the transition period when the water temps are still cool, and then works efficiently and well all the way through the period, all the way through the transition period, and even afterwards, the reason the jerkbait works so well this time of year is because earlier in this transition period, when the water temps are still cool and the fish are still lethargic, you can still cover a lot of water and move around to find where the fish are located, but you can do it in a slower way to where you can keep that bait in front of the fish, or you can keep this bait in front of the fish in the strike zone longer to entice it to bite whenever something quicker moving is going to move past it too quick. The fish just isn't moving that fast. The jerk bait works absolutely phenomenal. Whenever it comes to my jerk bait setup, I like, again, you're going to hear a lot of this, 7 foot to 7'4", medium heavy, fast action tip for these. I stick to a fluorocarbon line, and I really like to stay with a 14 to a 16-pound test. And the final bait I want to go over is a square bill crankbait. Now, the square bill, a lot like the buzz bait, is really better during the later part of this transition when the water temps are moving up or warming up, and the fish are starting to move back into those flats, and they're starting to, some have spawned, some haven't spawned. You're going to maybe even have fry garters at this point. The square bill crankbait is a great way to go cover water in the shallower areas, right? Especially if the fish are late in the bottom or if they're trying to clean up beds. A square bill crankbait is a great way to entice a reaction bite. Whenever it comes to my setup, 7 foot to 7'2", I like a medium with a fast action tip rod. I like a slightly faster reel with this. I'll a lot of times be in a 7 1-to-1, something like that. When it comes to my line selection, I like a lighter fluorocarbon. This is the only bait you're going to hear me say that I like a lighter pound test. And the reason behind that is I think to get a lot of the essential action that you need out of a square bill, you need to have an 8 or a 10-pound test. So that's all the baits I have for you today. If there's any of these baits you want to hear more about, make sure you leave that in the comment section. My name's Jordan, and if you enjoyed this experience, make sure you click that like and subscribe button. I'll see you later.